The royal hall of Vareth was alive with laughter. Golden banners hung from the high walls, glowing under the warm light of crystal torches. Alien nobles in bright robes sat on high seats, their jeweled eyes fixed on the center of the room, and there, surrounded by guards, stood a single human, Jack. He was not dressed for a royal court. His boots were dusty, his jacket torn. His hands were rough, and his face carried the calm look of someone who had seen too many battles. He stood tall, despite the hundreds of eyes watching him. On the throne sat King Valnor, a giant of a man with skin like polished stone. Beside him, the Princess Araya lounged with a smirk, her long silver hair spilling over her shoulder like liquid moonlight. Her beauty was famous across star systems, and so was her sharp tongue. "This is the human they speak of," Araya said, her voice carrying through the hall. "I thought they were supposed to be taller." The court laughed. Jack didn't move, didn't even blink. Something about his stillness made Araya lean forward. Curious, she had seen warriors beg for mercy. She had seen assassins tremble before her father. But this human stood, as if he were the one judging them, bored of the silence. Araya let her voice drip with sarcasm. "Tell me, human, if you survive the trials, I'll marry you." The words hung in the air like a spark in a dry field. The court roared with laughter. The trials were a death sentence. No outsider had ever lasted more than a few hours. The beasts, the traps, the storms they were built to kill. Even trained alien champions died in them. Jack tilted his head slightly. His eyes met hers. And though his voice was quiet, it carried across the hall. "All right," he said. The laughter froze. A few nobles stopped smiling. Araya's smirk faltered for the briefest second before returning. "You didn't misunderstand, human," she said slowly. "This isn't a game. The trials are not fair. They never are." Jack replied. The king slammed his staff against the stone floor. "So be it. The human will face the trials at dawn." The hall erupted again, some cheering, others shaking their heads. The guards grabbed Jack's arms, but he didn't resist. He let them lead him out, his eyes never leaving the princess. And though Araya kept her smile, she felt an odd twist in her chest. Later that night, she found herself looking out of her balcony at the darkened training grounds far below. She saw him, the human, sitting alone, sharpening a short blade under the cold moonlight. No fear in his movements, no hesitation. Most warriors prayed before the trials. He simply prepared, strange creature. She whispered to herself. For some reason, she couldn't stop watching him. Morning came fast. The first trial would begin in the great arena. Araya sat with her father in the royal box. The crowd, a sea of colors and noise below. The gates at the far end of the arena groaned open. Jack stepped into the sunlight, dressed in simple armor, a single spear in his hand. The crowd booed. To them, this was a waste of time. A human would die quickly. Araya leaned on her armrest, ready to see him run in panic. The second gate opened, and a roar shook the ground. A massive beast, covered in armored plates, stomped into the arena. Its jaws could crush steel. Its claws could cut through stone. The ground trembled with each step it took toward him. Most fighters attacked fast, hoping to catch it off guard. Jack didn't move. He waited, eyes locked on the creature. The beast charged, dust flying in its wake at the last moment. Jack sidestepped with impossible speed, driving his spear into a tiny gap between its neck plates. The monster bellowed in pain, twisting violently. Jack rolled away, avoiding a swipe that could have taken his head. The crowd gasped. The princess leaned forward, her fingers gripping the armrest. No one had ever wounded that beast so quickly. And yet, the human didn't even look proud. He just reset his stance. Watching, thinking. Minutes later, the beast lay still. The arena was silent, except for the heavy breathing of the human. He lifted his eyes to the royal box for a heartbeat. Their gazes locked again, and this time, Araya's smirk was gone, replaced with something she couldn't name. The king stood, his voice booming. First trial, complete. The crowd erupted in disbelief and cheers. Araya leaned back slowly. The human was still alive, and for the first time in years, she didn't know whether to be amused or worried. The roar of the crowd still echoed in Jack's ears as the guards led him from the arena. Their faces a strange mix of fear and respect. They didn't speak to him, and he didn't speak to them. His hands were steady, but his mind was already moving ahead. The trials had only begun. Araya watched from the high balcony as he disappeared into the shadowed tunnels beneath the stadium. She told herself she was only curious to see how long the human would last, but her eyes kept following the path he took until the darkness swallowed him. It was ridiculous. No outsider ever passed the second challenge. The air inside the tunnels was colder, damp with the smell of stone and old water. Jack was taken through winding corridors until they reached a massive gate carved with ancient symbols. The guard captain avoided his gaze, muttering the rules of the next trial, as if speaking to the floor. You must find your way through the flood caves before the tide rises, fail, and you drown. The gate groaned open, and the smell of salt and rot hit him inside. The cave stretched in jagged tunnels lit only by glowing moss. The ground sloped downward toward pools of black water, somewhere deep inside. A slow drip echoed like a clock counting down. Jack stepped inside, his boots sinking into wet sand. Behind him, the gate slammed shut. The silence was immediate, thick. The only sound was the distant rush of water far below. He moved carefully. Tracing the uneven walls with his fingers, he found narrow passages barely wide enough to squeeze through, and deep shafts where the water surged in and out like a giant's breath. Twice he stopped, listening, certain he wasn't alone. A faint splash, a shuffle of movement, then a voice, weak, trembling. Help. Please. Jack followed the sound, finding an alien boy pinned under a fallen beam. The child's gills fluttered rapidly, his skin pale from lack of water. Any other competitor would have left him. Every second wasted meant the tide climbed higher, but Jack knelt without hesitation. He braced the beam, using the wall for leverage. His muscles strained, veins standing out on his neck. The beam shifted, enough for the boy to crawl free. Jack didn't wait for thanks. He just said, "Stay above the water," and moved on, somewhere ahead. The tunnels began to rumble. The tide was coming in, fast. Water surged past his ankles, then his knees. He kept moving, following the faint glow of moss until it led him to a wide chamber. The exit was across a deep pool, now filling with swirling, cold seawater. He didn't stop to think. He ran, leaping from rock to rock. The last one crumbled under his boot, throwing him into the water. The shock of the cold stole his breath. In the darkness below, something massive shifted, a shadow with too many fins and teeth. Jack forced himself upward, breaking the surface just as a jagged fin sliced past him. He swam hard, arms burning. He reached the far ledge and hauled himself up, rolling onto the stone just as the creature lunged, its jaws snapping inches from his boot, gasping for air. He staggered toward the final tunnel. His wet clothes clung to him, every step heavier. Ahead, faint light spilled from the exit gate. He reached it just as the water surged up behind him. The gate opened, and the crowd's roar hit him like a wave. He walked out into the sunlight, dripping and exhausted, but alive. The king frowned, clearly not pleased. The princess didn't move, but her lips curved in the faintest smile. Something was changing. She could feel it, and it unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The third morning came with a sky painted in violent red and gold. Storm winds rattled the high towers of Vareth, carrying the smell of ash. The trials had moved to the most feared stage, the fire fields, a volcanic wasteland where heat warped. The air and the ground itself shifted without warning. Jack stood at the edge of the scorched expanse, the ground cracking under his boots. Thin streams of molten rock snaked across the black earth. Each step would need to be chosen carefully. One wrong move and the ground could open beneath him. Far above, in the royal viewing platform, Araya rested her chin on her hand, trying not to look too interested. The last two trials had surprised her, but this one would surely end him. Even seasoned champions had burned alive before making it halfway. She told herself she was only watching for the spectacle. But her eyes kept finding him. A horn sounded deep and heavy. Jack began moving. He kept low, scanning for shifts, and the stone, the heat was punishing, searing the back of his throat in the distance. A sudden roar rolled across the fields. From behind a wall of steam emerged a creature the size of a warship. Its skin glowing with cracks of molten light, lava, dripped from its jaw, hissing as it hit the black ground. Its eyes locked onto him, and it began to advance. Each step sending tremors through the earth. Most would run, but Jack didn't. Instead, he began to circle, forcing the beast to turn. The heat from its body was enough to blister skin still. He moved in closer, testing its reactions. He spotted something, a pattern in how it stepped, one side slower than the other. The beast lunged, and Jack dove aside. Rolling behind a cracked column of rock, in one swift motion, he drove his spear into a weak seam in the stone, splitting it. Molten gas hissed out. And a moment later, the rock burst, sending shards and fire into the beast's exposed limb. It howled, thrashing in pain. Jack used the chaos to sprint toward a narrow ridge leading to the next checkpoint. The ground shook violently as the wounded creature gave chase. But its injured leg slowed it enough for him to stay ahead by the time he reached the far ledge. The creature was too large to follow. It slammed against the cliff face, shaking the ground beneath him before retreating into the smoke. Jack turned and looked back only once, his face unreadable from above. Araya found herself standing without realizing it. Her pulse was quick, not from fear, but something far more dangerous. She had laughed when she first saw him. Now she was starting to wonder if the joke was on her. The air in the arena was thinner this time, cold enough to sting the lungs. Jack stood at the mouth of a narrow bridge of stone that hung over nothing, a black void stretching so far down it seemed endless. On the far side, silver banners whipped in the wind, marking the start of the sky hunt. A dozen alien warriors were already there, each wearing a sleek flight harness with thrusters humming low. They carried energy lances and curved blades, their armor gleaming in the pale light. Every one of them turned to watch the human arrive. Some grinned like predators from the royal platform. King Valnor leaned forward, his voice carrying over the cold wind. "Survive until the last chime, or kill your hunters," he said. His tone made it sound more like a command than a rule. Jack stepped onto the bridge, feeling the gusts push at him from every side. The hunters wasted no time to launch from the edge. Their harnesses glowing as they swooped toward him. He dropped flat, letting them pass overhead. The moment they looped around for another pass, he moved. His eyes tracked the cables anchoring their harnesses to small power packs at their waists. Timing his step with the wind, he used the tip of his spear to hook one as it passed, yanking hard. He sent the first hunter spiraling out of control. The second dove straight at him, blade first. Jack stepped sideways, letting the attacker's own speed carry them off the bridge and into the void. The harness flared as it caught air again, but not before smashing into the cliff wall. More came, weaving and darting like hawks. Jack moved low and quick, forcing them into the narrow sections where their wings became clumsy. He used the bridge's broken edges as cover. baiting them into striking where he wanted, from above. Araya's hands tightened on the railing. She could see what the others couldn't. He wasn't reacting in panic. He was hurting them. Each kill was precise, clean, and without hesitation. By the time the final chime rang through the cold air, only 2 hunters remained. Circling him warily, he didn't go for them. He just stood still, daring them to come. They didn't. When the horn sounded to end the trial, Jack turned toward the royal platform and looked straight at Araya. The wind pulled at his hair, his expression calm for a heartbeat. She felt as though the distance between them didn't exist at all. The celebration after the sky hunt never reached Jack's quarters. The palace halls were buzzing with whispers. Nobles and guards speaking in low voices about the human who had now survived 4 trials in various long history. No outsider had ever come this far. The king summoned his council in a chamber lit only by a single ring of blue fire. Their voices clashed like steel on steel. Some called for Jack's immediate execution before the next trial, claiming the law was a tradition, not a promise. Others warned that killing him now would make the crowd turn. The people had begun chanting his name in the streets. Araya sat silent, her gaze fixed on the fire. She had been the one to start this with a careless joke, but now the weight of her words pressed on her like armor she couldn't remove. When her father demanded her opinion, she met his eyes and said simply, "He's earned the next trial." The king's jaw tightened, but he gave a short nod. The decision was made. And the danger doubled. That night, Araya left the royal wing without her guards. She found Jack in the lower training hall. The smell of oil and steel thick in the air. He was repairing his spear, its shaft bound with strips of alien hide. For a moment she only watched, unsure why she'd come. "You should rest," she said finally. Her voice carried no mockery this time. He didn't look up. "Rest is for the dead." She stepped closer. "You've already proven yourself. Keep going." Jack's hands paused on the spear, because stopping would mean it was all for nothing. There was something in his tone that made her chest feel tight. She almost asked what nothing meant. But footsteps echoed in the corridor. A palace messenger appeared, pale and out of breath. "Your Highness, there's been an attack at the outer gates. They're saying assassins from the Drow Syndicate." Raya turned toward the door, but the messenger hesitated. Glancing at Jack, they weren't looking for the king. The tea, they were asking for the human. Before anyone could move, the lights in the hall flickered and died. The sound of distant shouting carried in. Jack slid the spear into his grip, his voice low. "Looks like the next trial's starting early." The palace had never felt so alive with danger. Shouts and the clash of steel echoed through its marble corridors. The usual polished calm now broken by running feet and the sharp smell of burning oil. Somewhere deep inside the walls, alarms wailed like wounded animals. Jack moved with purpose, his spear balanced in one hand. His steps silent despite the chaos. Araya stayed just behind him. Her silken gown gathered in her fists to keep from tripping. The glow of torches flickered wildly as shadows darted ahead. Of them, not guards, not servants, but figures moving too fast and too sure. The Drow Syndicate's assassins wore bone-white masks, their armor stitched with the teeth of creatures Jack didn't recognize. They weren't here for the king. That much was clear. Every one of them angled their path toward him. Ignoring the alien princess at his side, the corridor opened into the glass garden. A sprawling chamber roofed with crystal panels that reflected the moonlight in cold silver beams. The assassins emerged from every direction. Silent but deadly, Jack stepped forward without hesitation. Planting himself between them and Araya, "Stay behind me," he said. His voice steady but edged like a blade. One assassin lunged, and Jack pivoted, driving his spear through the gap under their arm before yanking it free and turning to meet. The next, his movements were quick, clean, no wasted energy. Araya's heartbeat pounded in her ears. She had seen warriors fight before, but never like this. There was no roar. No need for intimidation, just precision, as if each enemy had been defeated in his mind before the fight even began. More masked figures poured in, forcing them back toward the far wall. A massive stained glass panel behind them glowed faintly. In the moonlight, Araya glanced over her shoulder and realized there was nothing beyond it but open air and a drop hundreds of feet down. Jack noticed too. His eyes darted once to the glass, then to the assassins closing in. "Hold on," he said, and before she could ask why, he spun his spear in a wide arc, smashing the panel into 1,000 glittering shards. Cold wind roared in. Without warning, he pulled her with him and leaped into the night. They landed hard on a lower terrace, rolling to absorb the fall. The sound of breaking glass and shouting guards echoed above, but there was no time to rest. More assassins were already scaling the wall toward them. Jack offered her his hand to help her up, his voice low. "This trial's not in the arena anymore." The terrace shook under the weight of grappling hooks biting into the stone. Jack yanked Araya behind a row of carved pillars as masked figures vaulted over the edge. Landing with the grace of predators, the moon painted their bone white. Masks into grinning skulls, there was no crowd here, no royal trumpets, no ceremonial rules, only the cold truth that if he lost now, no one would remember the trials. The syndicate wasn't trying to humiliate him. They were here to erase him completely. One came fast, twin blades flashing in the moonlight. Jack met the attack head-on, his spear locking against the metal before he twisted hard, snapping the assassin's wrist and sending the weapon spinning into the dark. The next two came at once, forcing him into a narrow space where every movement had to be exact or fatal. Araya pressed her back to the pillar, clutching the shards of her gown as though they could protect her. She hated feeling useless, hated that she could only watch until one assassin broke from the fight and came straight for her. Before Jack could reach her, she snatched up a fallen blade, her hands unsteady but her swing wild and true. The assassin stumbled back, surprised by the sudden defiance. That heartbeat of hesitation was all Jack needed. His spear punched clean through the attacker's chestplate. But the fight wasn't slowing. More were coming up the wall, more shadows in the dark. Jack's breathing was heavy now, sweat mixing with dust and blood. His eyes flicked toward the far end of the terrace, a single narrow stair curling down into the night. "Go," he told her. "Get to the ground, find a south gate." She shook her head. "If you fall here, the promise is broken." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Princess, I was never here for the promise." For the briefest second, she saw past the soldier, past the trials, past the human who had turned her joke into a scandal, and into the man who would rather die fighting than be owned by anyone. The next wave hit, and Jack charged, forcing them toward the edge with a fury she had never seen before. Each strike was faster, sharper, until the last assassin toppled into the void. Silence returned, broken only by the sound of their breathing. Down below, the city lights flickered like distant stars. Araya stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "And if I asked you to stay?" He looked at her for a long moment, then let the spear rest against his shoulder. "Then maybe," he said. "This was worth it after all."